So let's look at a few more scenarios from the Catalan type of setup. So when white plays g3 and the setup with the bishop in fianchetto. So we play bishop f5 and after bishop z2. So most of these moves are, all of these moves are actually transposable. So this is the scenario you need to acquire as black if you want to go on with this theory and destroy the Catalan. So we're going to look at something we've never seen before. One of them is, let's start with knight f3. c6, we're going to build this structure. Remember to watch the other videos of how to beat the Catalan to understand how to do it. Castle and knight d7. And now, knight c3 is a move we've never seen before. So we go with bishop e7. And now, the plan is this one, knight to d2. The white play just means to play e4. That's the plan, we all know that. Queen to b6 is the right move. Let's see. e4, you take with the pawn, surprisingly. And after the knight takes back... Well, before that, just a second, let's see what happens after knight to c4 attacking the queen. It's an interesting idea, but you just play queen a6, get out of the way, you're up a pawn, and you're also attacking the knight, queen attacking the knight. So b3, defending and preparing the fianchetto, knight g goes to f6, defending that pawn further, rook to e1, finalizing the attack on the pawn, but now you play b5. The knight has to move, knight e5. What happens now? Bishop to b4, threatening to win a piece, therefore bishop to b2 has to happen. Now you take this one, pawn takes back, rook to d8, attacking the queen, queen e2, saving the queen, knight to d5, double attack on the knight. This cannot be defended in any way, so white will have to play a special move. Let's say if white plays this move, knight takes pawn in e4, seems interesting. You take the rook, and when the rook takes back, you castle, you just tap the exchange, there's no advantage. If instead the queen takes the bishop, you take this one, the queen takes back, and now again you castle, and you wrap the exchange. There's not really a compensation. You're gonna have to take the game from here. Too many things that can happen now, but basically white gave up any sort of advantage he might have had. Back in this position, instead of knight e4, when the knight is kind of, well, unable to do anything, the white player is unable to save the situation, white might take this knight, you might argue. Now you simply take back with the pawn. But it looks like now white is not going to lose the exchange. White can either play rook to d1, where c3 is really stupid. It's really bad about this bishop. c4 can never really happen, so this bishop will be locking himself up. Rook to d1, but now you play bishop a3. And if the bishop refuses the swap, you play c5, so the bishop will have to move, and then the swap is forced. If let's say white goes to c3 with the bishop, castle. So why is the position evaluated as if black was almost up a piece? It's because this pawn is very weak and it will be taken eventually. And let's make an example. If white plays bishop d2 with the idea of going to f4 to defend the bishop d2, bishop e2 is a fork, right? So what if white plays rook to b1? Okay, well, c5. Okay, and after bishop d2 to go and defend the pawn, which we're going to take simply by playing queen e6. h6, stopping the bishop from going to f4, because then you can play g5. And h4 by white is a thematic move in this type of position, where you play rook f to e8. And bishop f4 appears to be possible now. So what's really going on here? You play queen to c6. White cannot really move a thing, not a single thing, without losing stuff. These rooks are completely trapped. You might argue, what about c4? Well, you just take, and after take back you play d4. So now it appears that rook b3 is possible, comes with an attack on the bishop, allows the development of the other rook, prepares rook b7 or something like that. Fine, bishop to b4, defending it, and after rook to b1, white is meaning to play simply a3, and then it looks really good. Black plays the stunner, d3. Hehe. This pawn cannot be taken, because once white takes with the rook, pawn takes back, discovering an attack on our queen, but then we can take this queen and we have a passed pawn. It's really strong passed pawn. And back in this position, what if white plays a3 immediately? The idea is simple. After bishop a5, the only move, rook to b5, forces the bishop to abandon that diagonal, meaning that d3 can be met with queen d2, and we might not be able to get anything out of that. That's fine though. We play bishop c7 and we finalize the attack on that pawn. Rook to b1. Doesn't scare anyone. Position evaluated minus 450 after taking that pawn with the bishop. So let's leave it there. And let's make a nice recap. So they play this rubbish move, g3. bishop f5, bishop develops, e6, knight f3, c6. So we build this familiar pawn chain, so castle, knight d7, knight c3, and now bishop e7, knight to d2, we play queen b6. So if war comes, now we can take. What if white simply takes back? You're probably wondering, that's definitely the most reasonable move. Okay, well, knight g to f6, developing. What to do now? If this knight is taken, white gives up the entire initiative, which, you know, is not even that great in the Catalan, although it's a very solid opening. If knight takes back. And now what to do? If bishop develops, threatening to simply push the pawn, d5, d6 would be interesting. Developing, you just take this pawn, it's not poisoned. Knight a4 attacking the queen, you just take this one as well. So you're up 2 pawns with no compensation. That's just a blunder. Back in this position, if instead of bishop e3, white plays knight a4, right? You play queen a6. Comes with an attack on the knight. So when the knight goes back, rook to d8. Putting pressure on the pawn in d4. So bishop e3 appears to be possible now, but now c5. About d5. Okay, castle. And after rook to e1, rook to d7, prepare to double up. The pawn is pinned. Queen to f3, I'm pinning the pawn, potentially taking, and then putting pressure on b7, but most importantly, unpinning the pawn. Knight takes in d5, we gotta play this. Rook a to d1, pinning the knight. Queen a5. So obviously now we are pinning that knight. So let's say, for example, if knight takes, then simply take this one. This rook can't take because we're attacking e1. c3 allowing the defense of that diagonal. Rook f to d8. We don't have that much of an advantage, but this is like, consider that white is playing white and is going to a less favorable endgame. This is ridiculous. Besides, we're also threatening to win this pawn. Let's say white plays a3. The best route to continue is obviously bishop e4, deprive white of the fianchetto light bishop, which is the strongest piece in the Catalan. If instead of a3, let's say, what's the plan here? Now here it would be great to simply swap rooks. If it was black to move again, for instance. Here he will just take. And after take, this is just a free pawn. And now position is like -3. So yeah, black is playing the better endgame. So back in this position, black has just played knight f6, and we've seen with the variation, the boring variation with knight swapping everything in f6. So what if white goes on with development? Bishop e3. Okay, fine. You play knight to d5, blocking also the arrival of that pawn, which would have been very annoying. Okay, knight to c5. What to do now? You take this bishop, right? Don't even think about it. There is no Zwischenzug like knight to d7 with an attack on this queen, because you will simply take here in b2. Everything is hanging. A move like knight e4 attacking the queen is met simply with knight takes queen, and you are defending also here. And this is better for black, obviously. In this position, after taking the bishop in e3, what if instead of knight a4, our opponent takes us back? Now you just take this knight. Yes, the knight can save itself, but you also have an attack here, and it's a winning endgame for black. So as mentioned, in this position, the Zwischenzug knight d7 doesn't work. You're just gonna take the bishop, and now the knight can't really take here. They have to take back, but now you can simply take this knight as well. And after takes back with the bishop, double attack on this pawn. Again, black is winning this endgame. So let's take it from the start. We're gonna see something new now, a new type of scenario. So g3, the bishop goes out, bishop g2, e6, and remember, all these moves are transposable. White can play a3, e3. We've never seen the scenario with e3. It has to be seen. But then you go on with c6 and knight f3. So that's gonna happen anyway, right? So if white plays knight f3, you play c6 and now e3. So that's a transposition. So let's look at this. The scenario with this pawn chain, we have never seen it before. Okay, castle. Short, bishop e7, short castle. Knight to d7, same stuff. And now let's see a couple of options. If c4 now. Well, thank you very much for the white player for delaying the queen's gambit for so long. If he had played c4 way before that, we could have played the Chigorin. But we're gonna have to take it from here. You take this pawn. This is a free pawn. Knight to c3 appears to be possible. You play knight g to f6, develop. Two moves let's look at now. Knight to g5. You'll see why in a second. You just play bishop d3, attacking the rook. Rook e1. Knight to d5 comes now. A move like e4 doesn't work because you will simply take this one. And then when you get taken back, you go double attack on the knight in g5, so e4 doesn't work. A move like knight takes knight, that just solidifies our pawn structure. Take back. Now e4 seems to be possible, except no, because bishop takes knight for free. So this is just better for our opponent. So knight g5 plan with the idea of pushing e4 does not work. So what's the thematic move here? The thematic move in this position is not knight g5, but rather knight to d2 with the idea of pushing e4. Okay, you play bishop d3. And when the rook moves, castle. e4 by white. e5. This is the crucial move. You can't allow e5 from white. d5. Was it possible? No, because take. Now bishop to b4, attacking the knight. Knight has to move. Knight to e4. But you can tell that this is going way too good for us. We're gonna take. And now knight is pinned, so bishop takes. And now knight to c5 attacks the bishop. Threatens to take a bishop back to the fianchetto. Seems to be making sense. Rook e8, defend the pawn. That's a very strong, important pawn. a3 attacking the bishop. How do we react? Take. We don't care. We hate knights, remember. Bishop takes back, knight to b3 attacks the rook. The rook will have to move. a2 is the only move, but now e4. We're gonna close the line here. This is a completely winning endgame. We're also gonna take this one. So let's go back to this position. Earlier we went through c4, right? When they play c4 after that, when it's kind of too late, move 7, you can just take the pawn and keep the pawn advantage. Let's look at c3. This is also one of the most popular ideas. Then later we're gonna look at b3, fianchetto, which is the one that I dislike the most. So after c3 you play a5. It stops b4 from happening. Two options now. Knight f to d2, with the usual idea of playing e4. Well, knight f6, protect that square. e4, what's happening? Take. And after rook e1, castle, and now it appears that knight can take the pawn. What to do? e5. Always remember to play this type of move against the Catalan. It really is a game changer. It changed my performance a lot. I used to lose a lot against the Catalan. Pawn takes, knight takes back, bishop b4, finishing development. What's going on here? Knight to d3 ends the game. There's an attack here, there's an attack on the rook, and it's just favorable. I mean, it does really end the game, but white has got absolutely nothing with up the bishop pair, and the game is open. It's not really a Catalan anymore. So you may argue in this position, after a5, what if instead of knight d2, the other knight goes to d2, which seems to be much more reasonable. Let's go on. Knight f6 once again. Two options here. Let's start with knight h4, attacking the bishop. Trying to win our bishop here. Bishop d3. Rook e1 is forced. Castle. Knight to b3. Attacking the bishop. Okay, fine. Play a4. We don't care about that bishop. If they take us, you take here. Let's make an example. Take. The pawn cannot take. If bishop to d2, simply take. It's a free pass pawn. It's an amazing position. You're winning. If a3, stopping the pawn, c5. Obviously, if we play c4, this is really good. If e4 by white, the obvious move, the idea to smash in the center, c4. Queen e3, moving away. Take, and after take, and after take. Well, you just take everything. So you're going for a winning endgame. Okay, let me show you how to win this endgame. If queen takes, then you take back. Rook a5. Going for the weak pawns. Bishop f4. Rook f to a8. Once again. Bishop to e5. These are all best moves according to the engine. Take. Rook a5. If f4 to defend the pawn, you play rook to d5, you're infiltrating and you're cleaning up all the opponent pawns. If rook to e1 to defend that, rook to d5. Once again, you're completely winning. So in this position, if pawn takes instead of queen takes, okay, queen to c8. And after queen to g4, these are all best moves. Knight f6, attacking a queen, queen g3, and now it looks like everything's under defense. Rook a5. How to finalize the attack? Two options here. Bishop to g5 appears possible. King h8. Now bishop takes is very too dangerous. After rook a to d1 developing, rook to g8. King f1, these are best moves to stop obviously the threats. Knight to d5 moves away. h5. You play h6. This is very important to play h6 in a move like that, in a moment like that. Knight e3, bishop e3, knight back to f6. And we're finalizing the attack on the weak pawn. So that was gonna happen inevitably. Back in this position, instead of bishop g5, what about rook e5? We're all thinking about this move, and this is why the engine decided to play queen g4, queen g3. Take. And now queen c6. Bishop g5, what about now? Double attack on the knight, what to do? Knight d5, it's important. Queen to g3. f6. If bishop goes to, well, simply bishop f4, well, knight to e7 is the best move. Rook e1. It looks like white is okay, but not really. h5. And after queen to e3, double attack in here, you'll play king to f7. It's defended. And this is our opponent having played only top moves. It's the most solid variation. We gotta stop it here. We've gone way too far than I wanted to. Position evaluated almost -3. Let's drop the line here. Right, so remember, the videos about the Catalan are going to be more boring, more solid, and longer. The lines are going to be longer because the moves are all transposable. They're all going to happen, and you gotta see how many plans is possible. It's just not sharp at all. That's the problem. Here in this position, after a4 attacking the knight, instead of queen takes here, what about knight c5 attacking the bishop? What to do? Take, and now bishop to b5, saving the bishop. b4 saves the pawn. Fine, take en passant. Queen takes back. Knight to d7, finalizing the attack on that pawn. Knight f3, back to f3. So now you realize that knight h4 doesn't work. You can just take in c5, queen c2, and now bishop f6, finalizing the attack on that very weak isolated pawn. Bishop to b2, bishop to d3. Queen will have to move. Queen to d2. Bishop back to g6. Okay, so after knight to d4, all these moves make perfect sense. You play h6, and after h4, what a boring game this is. Queen to b6, a4 by white, rook f to d8, a5, how to deal with this? Rook takes, and after c4, finally coming out with a double attack on the rook and an attack on the pawn in d5. This is the engine being very enginey right now. You take this one. You take this one. And after rook takes back, you take this one. Bishop c4, threatening the skewer. Knight e4, attacking the queen. So bishop a5 is not good because you will just take here. And you've got a very serious pawn advantage here. So let's take it from the start. So these are the moves that are going to happen. That's how white plays. e6. Knight f3, c6. In the scenario with e3, you still play bishop e7. Castle, knight d7. This is just happening. And in the variation with c3, you play a5. Knight d2. Knight g to f6. And now let's look finally at this variation that we're all waiting for. Knight to e5. The more annoying one. Okay, you have to take. And when the pawn takes back, knight to g4 finalizes the attack on that pawn. If f4 is played, obviously knight e3 ends the game. So after knight f3, bishop e4 pins that knight. That means we want to give the bishop, for the fianchetto one, h3. You take this one with an attack on the queen. So bishop takes back, knight back to e5, and that's it. We're up a pawn. No compensation. Bishop to g2, castle. e4 by white. What to do? Bishop to c5 is a very strong move. a4. What to do? You just play d4. Pawn takes, bishop takes. That's it. King to h1, I'm pinning the pawn so that white can play f4. Bishop back to b6. Two options here. If bishop to f4 continue in development, knight to d3. Queen to d2, saving the queen. Queen to d4. triple attack on this pawn, also double attack on this one. So rook a to d1, for instance, exploiting the pinned knight now. You just take this one with check. And after rook takes, queen takes back. And after take, black is up the exchange. So that doesn't work. So back in this position, instead of bishop f4, what about f4? Which is the whole point. Okay, well then they're giving it the possibility to trade queens, do it. And now rook f to d8. And there's nowhere really that makes sense to put the bishop. So after take, what to do? If the pawn takes the knight, you've got check. And when the king moves, check. And when the king moves, check. And you're finalizing the attack on this bishop, you're going to a winning endgame. Exploiting the really ugly pawn structure of the opponent. If instead in this position, instead of taking this knight, white plays bishop to e3. Well, take it. And after take the knight, rook to d4, b3 to defend the weak pawn, king f8, get into the game, bishop f3, rook to b4, and now rook to b1 appears possible to defend that, but now bishop to d4 finalizes the attack over here. Let's leave the line there. Once again, we've gone a little bit too far. Let's go back here. In this position, black has just played knight d7. And this is the position to remember, you know, the pawn chain that we need to build. This is how you play it. What about b3? Let's look at this. Now here we play h5, my favorite move in most positions. White is meaning to play the fianchetto bishop, so he's not going to go this way, and therefore the diagonal on the king side is weaker. We're gonna go through h4. What if white, before h4, let's say white plays bishop b2. You play h4. So if you get a chance to play h4, you do it. Knight taking here is just horrible, because you just take back, and then the queen and the rook together are going on this file. It's gonna be checkmate fairly soon, I assume. So instead of that, instead of knight taking the pawn, what about c4? Thematic move. Okay, take this one. And that's it. You're already so much better. You're also threatening bishop h3, swapping for that bishop. White's threatening nothing. If white, let's say, takes with this pawn, for instance, right, knight g to f6. That's the most accurate way to continue. Knight d2, bishop d3. Since the knight played in d2, it allows us to play bishop d3. This is always a good move in the Catalan because the e-file is closed. And the f-file will be ideal. So after rook, well, rook f2, the rook gets trapped by the knight, right? So rook e1, knight e4. Great position. Knight e5 by white, the idea of going to f3 maybe. You simply take. Pawn takes back. Well, if pawn doesn't take back, if let's say white plays knight takes here in e4, you just take back with the pawn, and you're achieving pretty much the same thing. If instead the pawn does take the knight now, bishop to b4, pinning the knight, double attack on that knight. So bishop takes kind of the only thing left to do at this point. Take back with the pawn. The bishop is still, the knight is still pinned. a3 attacking the bishop. What to do? Remember the patterns. You take this one. We've seen something like that before. Queen d2, c5. Okay, b4 seems to be logical to challenge these pawns. b6. We don't care. Queen to d1. These are all best moves. Castle. Crazy enough. Castle. How is it possible? Rook to c1 now loses because of queen g5. And if, what's the plan? The plan here is to simply play king h7 and then king g6. And then bring the rooks. So you might wonder, what about, why did we castle? Well, we castle because rook c1 is a bad move, but we were wondering, we were just doing it for king safety. If, let's say after castling, if queen to g4, which is the whole plan, now here it would be a bit too risky to keep the king in e8, so castle is better. Queen e7 comes. And now a move like, obviously, rook a to d1, whatever, right? You got double attack on this pawn, you take the pawn in b4, it's free. There's no compensation. If instead the pawn takes us, you take back. And now the plan is to play Rook a to b8, put the rook on the open file. You'll have to take this game from here. This is better for black, considerably better. But this is obviously, it's a very solid opening. This is, in the videos on how to beat the Catalan, you're not getting to see any of all the crazy things about, like, you know, the King's Gambit, the Vienna Gambit, or Chigorin. None of this is happening here. It's the Catalan. The most disgusting, unacceptable, ugly opening. So in this position, after h4, we went through bishop b2, and more or less we saw the plans. What about h4? This is a very common move. You play knight g to f6, and after knight bishop to b2 now appears possible, but we're still gonna play knight e4. Okay, c4. These are all thematic moves. What's wrong? g5. This is the plan of playing h5, g5. The h4 is just not stopping you from doing that. You're gonna be opening the files, conquering glory. If takes, you take back with the bishop, and obviously you're just doing better here. Knight to d2 developing, you play h4. Nothing works, right? If let's say the knight takes, you just take back, and when the knight takes, you just take back with the pawn. Position evaluated -4 almost. You can tell this is really, really bad for the opponent. In this position, if you ask the engine, the best move is pawn takes in d5. And when you take back, a move like rook c1 seems logical, but you're just gonna take here in g3, you got double attack on it. So the best move according to the engine is to simply take this knight. Take back with the pawn. If the knight retreats, you can take this pawn for free. If the pawn takes you, then bishop e3, it's game over. If the knight doesn't retreat, but rather takes the bishop, queen takes back with some sort of transposition from before, rook c1 now seems possible, but you play h3. And you're winning the bishop from the opponent. Needless to say, bishop going back is met with h2, and you can take the game from there.